A linear supercity located in the northeast of England. The city, the countryside, the seaside, the lakeside, the hill town, all connected by a super fast transport system. A truly radical vision for the north. One the north would never build, but was it ever meant to? The northeast is a region built on industry. Steel making, shipbuilding and coal mining all fueled the development of this region. But with industrial decline gathering pace in the latter part of the 20th century onwards, the region teetered on a precipice. Revive its industries or reinvent itself. Architects and planners were drawing up visions of the future throughout this time. They would leave behind the traditional built forms of the past for radical concrete futures. Many architects at the time drew straight from Le Corbusier's own work. These concrete visions would inspire architects across the globe. The major architectural practices in Newcastle each proposed a vision of the future. Ryder and Yates proposed a concrete concert hall and government complex for a joined together city of Newcastle and Gateshead in the form of the Tyne deck. Napa architects, working alongside some of the biggest names in the region, proposed something on a much grander scale, the linear city. T. Dan Smith is a name which comes with a lot of prejudice when it comes to Newcastle's architectural history.
6 years ago, Dan Smith saw that hope for the future lay in a comprehensive policy for the north. It was Dan who gave Newcastle a 5-year housing plan, a planning officer, an inner cabinet, and a town manager. It was Dan who inspired a regional development council, associations for art and sport, and who helped to sow the seeds of Britain's new regional planning councils. Each of these swelled the voice of the northeast until it became the most publicised region in the country. Penny plain and tuppence-coloured, the white papers and colour sections have drowned the northeast in a sea of words.
My father was a miner. He worked in a colliery at Wallsend up the river here. And particularly people who knew the times would know that this was a difficult time for the miners. And the 1926 strike was a defeat. And then from 1926 until 1929, my father worked about 18 months. So that if you take from 1918 to 1929, there was about 2 years and a half work. So that this was humiliating, you know, really humiliating, and you felt a sense of injustice, and at that time I felt, well, you know, this has got to be altered, and right from those very early years, I should think, certainly by the time I was 12, I was a red-hot rebel and determined to alter it.
Is constantly at work behind the scenes.
Is what? £150,000 to put this on the ground, and X pounds a year to endow it, to keep it running, you know.
He has friends in high places, and his influence stretches far beyond the north. And at this London dinner, he's sounding out people who can help him with his plans for a science campus for the north. He'll get the thing moving and then step back behind the scenes. He's an expert at getting men with power and influence in the fight on his side.
Ordinary folk in the Peter region.
Dan Smith courted Europe's most expensive planners and architects. When the opposition objected, he told them, I appoint these men because the sort of city I want can't be made by the sort of person I am.
But of course it's not just enough to talk about rebuilding. There are many cities that have been rebuilt on the pattern of the old. So we really went into the European architectural field. We believed that it was necessary to analyse what made great cities like Venice and Athens and Florence and Rome.
This is not the story about this man's successes and failures, but of his vision for the region in the future. Smith could have stayed in this position at Newcastle City Council and continued his work. The regeneration of Newcastle was not yet done, but Smith wanted to move on to a bigger role, representing the region at a national stage.
Dan Smith is determined to redress the balance between an affluent south and an impoverished north. It has not been a lone struggle.
Smith wanted to transform the region the same way he transformed the city, by bringing it into the modern era and secure its future with new industries to replace the declining coal mining, ship manufacture and steel making. Smith got Professor Jack Napper from Newcastle University, founder of J.H. Napper and Partners Architects, draw his vision. Napper was 3 years away from retirement, but would join the team and would create the imagery of Smith's vision. The third man responsible for producing this vision for the future was Wilfred Burns. Originally brought to the northeast by Smith as the first city planner for Newcastle City Council, Burns' previous work on redeveloping Coventry after wartime bombing garnered him a reputation as one of the top planners at this time. His role as Newcastle's chief planner was a brand new post and one of the first in the country. It was a team under his vision which came up with the concepts of skywalks in the city centre, separating pedestrians on decks above cars. It was his work which would lead Newcastle to be coined the Brasilia of the North. Burns' department would gain national recognition, but how did these individuals produce vision, and who for?
Now he's a successful businessman with a 5-figure salary, has led Newcastle Council for 5 years, and drives a Mark 10 Jag in his new role as chairman of the Northern Region Economic Planning Council.
In order for Smith to progress towards his vision of leading the North East region for a new future, he would have to leave Newcastle City Council and join a newly formed body. The planning councils aimed to prevent economic decline and promote national growth.
We've now got to talk in terms of new cities. This is the point that I want to underline, because 40, 50, 60, 70,000 people are playing with 17 million population. In the northeast again, you had the background, if you like, in Peter Lee of the hostility of people who lived in the villages. They felt that this was the kind of community that they wanted, and they thought they could hang on to this. They thought that the collieries were eternal, and they were led to believe this. They lived in a world when mining had to be a career, and they had recruiting officers for miners. The stark reality was that the boys that made mining the career, weren't really to finish their career, that they were going, in fact, to have to move away from the area. This was the tragedy. You can only develop new towns, and you can only give them a really vital life if they are developed consciously and positively for bringing in new populations into the region, not as overspill, not as reluctant people moving out of a mining village and mining communities, but going towards something in a pioneering sense, taking part in building it up.
The North East is not one single urban area. It is an undulating landscape bordered by the Scottish borders to the north, the North Sea to the east, the North Yorkshire moors to the south, the North Pennines to the west. 3 major rivers, the Tyne, the Wear and the Tees, flow into the North Sea from the region, and each has a major industrial urban settlement. Newcastle, Sunderland and Middlesbrough, not forgetting the industrial towns, coalheads and ports. These settlements are connected by roads and railways, but these connections are not ideal. The region is not optimally connected. In the 1960s, many of the connections were even less well formed. Motorway connections were still under construction. Rail services would suffer from Beeching's cuts, and the coalfields led to settlements in disjointed locations. The major urban settlements of the northeast are laid out in a hub and spoke design, with the town or city centre being the hub, with spokes leading away from this in the form of roads or railways. This meant that public transport between spoke to another spoke would involve a journey into the centre and out again. In contrast to the hub and spoke model is the linear city. A linear city, from its name, is laid out on a single axis around a transport route. Over time, numerous examples of linear forms of settlement have been explored. The first notable one was Arturo Soria, who implemented it in Quadra Lineal de Madrid. Another was Edgar Cambal's Road Town, a vision of a linear street running straight across the US. Smith's vision for the region would actually be laid out in the Northern Architects Journal. The linear city would divide the region into distinct areas. The city, the countryside, the seaside, the lakeside, and the hill town, all connected by a modern transport system. The existing A1 would become the spine of the city, with new high-density developments surrounding this. In certain sections, pedestrian decks would span over the road. Along this spine of development would be the region's public transport system of the monorail. The design would build upon previous work of Cumbernauld Newtown and the Hook Newtown in London, specifically mentioned in the article as similar forms of design.
The biggest change of all could be at Durham, in the centre of the region, with Tyneside and Teesside each only 30 miles away. By the year 2000, Durham could so easily be spoiled by indiscriminate rebuilding. One answer would be to pull out a twin city and build there all the cultural and sports facilities that other cities can't support on their own. An opera house, theatre, sports stadium, conference halls and exhibitions for the whole region. By building astride the A1 in the open fields, the old Durham would not be spoiled, and the new twin city would only be minutes away by monorail. Here then is a vision of the Northeast, as it could be in the space age to come.
The key part of this work from Jack Napper was the production of a series of images that would demonstrate how this linear city would look. These are a combination of drawn elements and photo montages which would create an illusion of how this city would operate.
Almouth could have a harbour and yachting marina, built in the river estuary with parks, gardens, golf links and quiet hotels on its beautiful site by the sea. This could be the Aldborough of the North, a specialised centre for festivals of art and music, a sophisticated, modern resort, making the most of a traditional setting.
The 1964 issue of Linear City would also include detail on the creation of a new city. Teesside is the industrial heart of the northeast, the largest river estuary and the main port for the region. The urban conurbation forms a U-shape around the river, with Stockton upon Tees and Middlesbrough both centres. The two centres were seen by Smith and his team as a barrier to growth, preventing radial growth from a single major centre. Tees City and Tees Port would aim to become the European gateway for the northeast, the existing rail, air and sea links forming an interchange between Britain and Europe. The existing road route between Stockton and Middlesbrough would have a pedestrian platform erected over. This would form a new town centre, including residential, cultural, civic, commercial and shopping facilities. The new Tees City would be created in stages, creating a unified Teesside better connected to the river and port. Stepped terraces rising from this linear city would overlook the river. 750,000 new neighbours waking up to a sunrise over the Tees without ever expanding the boundaries of the conurbation.
Advisory Planning Committee of Local Government. We have some of the best planning officers in Britain that we've attracted to the region, in some of the major counties and certainly in the city here. So that with this kind of local government official, the council has got to take, if you like, from Whitehall to regional level, and then from regional level hand on to the planning authorities of local government, regional ideas and regional thinking. Our basic job, as I see it, is to reverse the trend of migration away from the region. And we've got to be able to do this on a fairly massive scale, because by the end of this century, there are going to be 17 million more people in Britain.
The articles published in the Northern Architects Journal were meant to be just the start. Following this, the Northern Economic Planning Council, under the helm of Smith, began writing their first report. This was to be known as Challenge of the Changing North. Part survey, part plan, designed to feed information into a national economic plan.
People will be impressed when they see something happening. In Wellbar House, catalogues, spec builders, modern, the regional plan is getting into action. The ministry men have moved in to create a little Whitehall of the North, to get the region moving again, and to reverse the fortunes of a recent past.
Smith's team rushed this report, much of its contents being based on outdated information, figures related coal mining, collated, before the National Coal Board's closure programme of 1965, and at last it was done. The year 1966, after time pressures and a lack of resources, 108 pages were completed, and Challenge of the Changing North was published. The opening foreword was written by Smith himself. This closes on, the study is now presented for public discussion. Our hope is that it will awaken widespread interest in the problems of the region and its future development, and that it will stimulate discussions of these among organisations concerned with the various aspects of regional life. It was meant to garner attention in Westminster and raise Smith into his position as a regional leader. It was Smith's manifesto to the region and a springboard for a national plan. I spent night after night and day after day going round the region to organisations, talking about it and talking about the future. T. Dan Smith's words on the Challenges report. But after all this, silence. No one from Whitehall called, no invitations, and no change to promote his vision further. This was the opposite of what Smith had believed would happen, culminating in Dan's biggest disappointment of his life. The government took a good deal less notice of the council's report than Smith would have liked. Smith was powerless to do anything and make them notice him. The Northern Economic Planning Council had no executive power and no ability to implement his ambitious plan for the region. He was disappointed by the reception. The radical vision for the North East would not progress.
The public going to a football match, what do you want to do? And he said, I would love to live in a thatched cottage. You see, he knows this. He doesn't know why, but he sees a cottage if he goes to the Cotswolds, and this is his dream of heaven. You don't know why, because in fact, you know, it might rain in and goodness knows what, but he imagines this is what he wants. And it's, if you like, combining his desire to move into a house like that and take a deep breath and say, this is what I've wanted all my life. It's a simple challenge. It's a simple challenge, in fact, and the ordinary man knows what he wants. So that the past, if you like, teaches us this. It teaches the ordinary man that if he goes somewhere, if he goes to the Lake District, he sees the lakes and he sees a mountain and he says, this is right. And he sees a block of flats and he says, that sticks up like a sore thumb. He knows the difference. He knows the difference between a mountain and a block of flats. And it's this kind of challenge, the landscape, the building in the landscape. He doesn't talk about buildings in the Lake District, he talks about the landscape. It's because in these places, in the old market towns, they knew how to build. They knew that the buildings were part of the town. They weren't all of the town, it was the feel of it that mattered. And in the city, if you go down Grey Street, you knew that these people had a conception, not only of material, proportion, scale, grandeur, if you like. All of these things were combined, and the ordinary man can feel this.
The linear city diagrams proposed in Northern Architect were never intended to be built, similar to Ryder and Yates' vision of the future with the Tyne deck. This was to be a talking point and push discussions on the future of the region at a time of significant industrial decline and change. The whole exercise was intended by T. Dan Smith as part of his new role as head of the Northern Economic Planning Council, a body which would end up with no power to get anything done, and a vision which it couldn't deliver. T. Dan Smith was passionate about the role of regional government.
Got to modernise local government so that we can use the top designers who are available in the region, using their design skill, their planning skill, combining the local councillors with ability to tackle these regional problems, rather than, if you take on this river, there are 18 authorities. And if you take 15 people meeting on each of them, 18 times 15, I don't know how many that is, but it's a lot of people, discussing housing with their own engineer, with their own architect, some of them without architects. Producing the houses, what kind of houses? Different kinds, considering the same problems, different solutions in different authorities.
But the Northern Economic Planning Council, with its limited powers, could not deliver on this, and it became a failed Labour government experiment into planned economies. Throughout this failed experiment, Smith used the position and his PR experience to raise the presence of the North, even if the built form outcomes never materialised. Smith would later go on to become chairman of the Aycliffe and Peterlee New Towns Corporation, where he would later be dragged down by his ties to John Paulson and his corruption charges. For the rest of the team, Jack Napper would retire in 1969, shortly after the publication of Linear City in the Northern Architects Journal. And finally, Wilfred Burns would leave the City of Newcastle's Chief Planner position and become Chief Planner at the Ministry of Housing and Local Government. Their work as a team on the Linear City in creating a new heart to the region would never be completed, nor was it ever meant to be. The ideas raised as part of the Linear City and challenge of the changing North would go on to transform the region. A regional transport system would be delivered decades later in the form of the Tyne and Wear Metro, a light rail system utilising existing rights of way with new tunnels under the centre of Tyneside, although it would take another few decades for this network to grow enough to consider it a true regional transport network. The vision of a lakeside would be realised through Kielder Water, a reservoir intended to provide Teesside steelworks with sufficient water, but delivered at a time of declining steel industry in the region, but now a major recreational attraction. The multi-layer city shown in the images would come following the Buchanan report of traffic in towns, which T. Dan Smith actually inputted into. This would transform the east of Newcastle city centre into a multi-layered city, a scheme which is still being undone. A similar scheme in Cumbernauld, outside Glasgow, its central core built above a road, is due for demolition, the centre falling out of favour. The northeast new towns of Killingworth, Washington, Peterlee and Newton Aycliffe were developed at a similar time and would accommodate much of the population growth for the region. The industrial decline of the region would actually lead to a falling population numbers. The vision of devolution and a voice for the North would come many years later after T. Dan Smith, in the form of the North of Tyne Mayor, followed by the North East Mayor. Recently, ground has been broken on a new linear city in Saudi Arabia, as part of their NEOM Giga project. This project too has pushed boundaries even beyond the Saudis' finances. The concept of a linear city would go on unbuilt, but parts of it can be found in the skywalks, civic dreams of the region, and now mirrored in deserts far away.